All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get things rolling. We've got a good amount of music to get through this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. We just want you to have a little bit of a window into all the fun that we have been having so far this year. Raise your hand if you've been having fun. Oh, yes. I'm sure every hand is going up. Some of them are just hiding behind their music stands. But we have had a great time. We have several new players who are starting with us for the first time this year. So, Kaylin, raise your hand. Joy, raise your hand. Other Joy, raise your hand. We haven't figured out how to distinguish them yet, or at least I haven't. So we have three new players in three sections, so we're excited about that. They're making fantastic progress. You'll get to hear from a couple of them later on in the program. We actually just came through our first playing tests. That's something new that we've instituted this year, and everyone survived. And not only that, but they all did a great job, so we're very excited about that. We're going to start off with a piece that's called Beethoven's Ninth. Can anybody guess which Beethoven's Ninth it is? Beethoven's Ninth what? Symphony. There we have some people who are classically literate. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Now, a symphony was an instrumental piece that an orchestra would play 200 years ago. But Beethoven was a composer who loved to push musical limits. And so he said, why not throw solo singers and a great big chorus of voices in as well and just make it as big and as exciting as possible? And sure enough, that's exactly what he did. The only problem was Beethoven was at the end of his life, at the end of his career. Anybody know what happened to Beethoven as he got older as a composer? He did. He lost his hearing gradually, and by the end of his life, he could hardly hear at all. And so here he is conducting this great piece that he has written, and yet he can't really hear what's going on. But apparently that didn't affect his ability to perform. Here's the way one of the violinists described Beethoven's conducting. Beethoven himself conducted. That is, he stood in front of a conductor's stand and threw himself back and forth like a madman. At one moment, he stretched to his full height. The next, he crouched down to the floor. He flailed about with his hands and feet as though he wanted to play all the instruments and sing all the chorus parts. Now, I'm not going to do that for us this afternoon. I hope you're not disappointed by that. But you may recognize this. Even if you haven't heard the symphony, you probably recognize a hymn text that we sing, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. Of course, it was the Ode to Joy that Beethoven set, which would have been sung in German originally. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Beethoven's Ninth. And Autumn is going to give us her percussion debut. That's one of our starter pieces that we often use at the beginning of the year. There's enough going on musically for it to be fun, but it's simple enough that some of our beginning players can jump right in. And I have encouraged our beginning players to play as much as they can for this concert. They'll leave some things out as they decide it works best, but they've jumped right in and done a fantastic job. So it's encouraging to see the progress that they're already making. Our next piece is a piece called Farandole. Farandole is technically a Christmas piece. Is it okay for us to play a Christmas piece for you this afternoon? I know it's not Thanksgiving yet, but you're not that kind of a crowd. You'll be just fine with that. And anyway, musicians have to start thinking about Christmas long before everyone else does. This is a piece by a French composer named Bizet, and he died actually at the age of 37, a fairly young composer at the time of his death. And people did not really recognize him at that time. He had just premiered his great opera Carmen that he's known for today. And it was only after that that he became really kind of a household name among musicians. And so this is based on a French carol from medieval times. And that's why we think of it as a Christmas piece, even though there aren't actually words that we sing to it. So this is Farandole by Bizet. Well, now that we've established a little bit of a Christmas mood, we're going to go ahead and roll with it. So Kaylin is going to start us off with our first solo this afternoon. We'll have a few more of those as we go through the program. And she's going to play for us a piece that needs no introduction, O Come All Ye Faithful. Well, how do you feel about stereotypes? Are stereotypes a good thing? Are stereotypes true? Well, there's a stereotype about trumpet players. And it's that trumpet players always think everything is about them. I don't know where that stereotype would have come from. I suppose it probably has something to do with the fact that they can blast the rest of us out of our seats at any time that they choose. And there are times when our trumpet section does a great job of doing just that. But in this case, it actually is all about the trumpets. So they're going to enjoy this one. This is a piece called Trumpet Voluntary. This piece is about 300 years old. It was called a voluntary because it was a piece that was supposed to be improvised on the spot. So you were kind of making it up at will as you were going along. But this is one that got written down and has been being played for many, many years since. And Zach has been conducting us in rehearsal on this. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the stick over to him, and we're going to see if he can hold this thing together till we get to the end of Trumpet Voluntary. Well, thanks, Zach. It is fun to be able to turn the stick over to somebody else from time to time and play just a little bit myself. Well, the next piece that we're going to have is a selection that Abby is going to play for us. And all of our musicians at some point during the year have to play a solo. They didn't have to play a solo for this concert, but several of them were willing to go ahead and go out on a limb and do that. And she's going to play a piece by Jerome Kern. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that name, but he wrote many songs in the early 20th century that are standards of American music theater, of the jazz repertoire. And the particular piece that Abby's going to play is a piece called Can't Help Loving That Man of Mine. And if you know anything about the musical that that song comes from, in that musical, the men are no good at all. And the point of the song is really that, well, sometimes love is not so much a rational thing, and in spite of who it is that you happen to love, you just find yourself continuing to love that person. The lines from that song are, fish gotta swim, birds gotta fly, I gotta love one man till I die, can't help loving that man of mine. Kind of a fun song that Abby's going to play for us. All right, well, not in keeping with the mood of the last piece, we're going to transition just a little bit here. This is another piece that will feature our trombone, our low brass section. I'm looking forward to that. This is a piece called Mars, and if you know anything about ancient mythology, then maybe you're aware that Mars traditionally was the Roman god of war, and the English composer Holst, around the early 19 teens, was writing a group of pieces called The Planets. And when he wrote the piece called Mars, he was thinking about Mars in terms of conflict, in terms of the god of war. And I don't know if you were composing how you might try to convey that sort of a feeling, but he does it through time signature. So if you have had musical training, you know what time signature is, right? You have things like 4/4, 3/4, 2/4, 6/8. If you're a musician, you see that and you think, no sweat, I've got this under control. What time signature is Mars in? 5/4. Boy, that's weird, kind of unsettled. And that's how Holst conveys this idea of unsettledness and conflict, aside from having some sort of weird sounding chords and intervals. So if you hear something weird, it's not because they played a wrong note. It's because Holst wrote it that way. And so we're going to go ahead and play this piece for you. It's interesting historically. A lot of people, when they first heard this piece, it was written just before the War to End All Wars began in 1914. And so for a lot of people, it was sort of eerie to hear this piece and then hear that in the context of what happened immediately after he wrote it. But this is Mars, and see if you can feel that 5/4 time signature. That's a fun one that we've been working on this year, but it's a completely different feeling than everything else that we've played so far. Well, the next thing that we're going to have is a performance of Swan Lake, and Joy is going to play this one for us, and she, believe it or not, just started working on this piece a few days ago, but she wanted to play, and we're all about that. So she's going to play Swan Lake. This is by Tchaikovsky. He was a Russian composer. One of my favorite pieces by one of my favorite composers, so we're looking forward to that. So Joy, you can come on up and go ahead and play your solo for us. to who the greatest composer of all time is. Any thoughts, any suggestions? The right answer is anonymous. Sure enough, that is the composer of the next piece that we're going to play. So many of the great tunes, so many of the great folk songs that you and I have known from the time that we were small children, we have no idea who came up with them first, but they've been passed on from generation to generation. The next song we're going to play is Shenandoah. This is a beautiful soaring folk melody, and we're going to see that the tune gets passed around from one section to another. So as we go through the piece, see if you can notice who has the melody. If they play out the way they're supposed to, you'll be able to hear it when they have the tune. Well, some of the greatest composers of all time have enjoyed using their musical skills to write for children. And one of those composers is Robert Schumann. He was a composer who lived in the 1800s. He was from Germany. He happened to be married to a phenomenal pianist named Clara, and they had 3 daughters. And if you have parents like that, you can imagine that the music is probably being forced on the kids. And so sure enough, Schumann decided to write a set of pieces for his 3 daughters. It's called Album for the Young. And there are actually 43 pieces in there. If any of you have ever taken piano lessons, you wouldn't have had to stick with it very long, and you might have been able to play one of those. But nobody's going to play the piano for us today. We're actually going to have our trombones play one of the pieces from that set. This is called Melody. Of course, a melody is just a tune. We don't all have the tune, but if you listen close, you might be able to tell which of the trombones is actually playing that melody. So guys, you can go ahead and come, and we'll play that. of working with our trombone players from week to week. So if I want to, I can force them to put something in the program. But as it happens, they don't give me a hard time about it. They're an accommodating bunch. Well, our next piece is going to have quite a Scottish flair. We don't have any bagpipes with us here today, and we did not tell the young men to wear their kilts. But you will, I think, have a feeling of old Scotland as you listen to some of the traditional songs. This is a medley, so there are a number of pieces that you probably associate with bagpipes or with Scotland or something like that. And so go ahead and follow the melodies as they're being passed around from section to section. Sometimes a very small musical change can completely transform the mood of a piece. One of the things that we talked about in band class this year in connection with our next piece that we're going to play for you is the difference between major and minor keys. When we play something in major, we probably expect it to sound happy, peaceful, upbeat, generally optimistic. If I come over to the piano and play a major chord for us, feels kind of like everything is all right in the world, doesn't it? Boy, that's cheaper than going to therapy. But if I take one of those pitches and move it down a step, now all of a sudden we're in a completely different world, aren't we? And composers know that kind of thing. And they enjoy exploiting those kinds of differences. So we're going to finish out with a piece called Scary Had a Little Lamb. And you'll have to see as we play if you can tell why it's called Scary Had a Little Lamb. You'll recognize it, but it'll be a little bit different than you're used to. Well, I was just impressed they made it all the way to the end. After the spoken part, that's usually where everything falls apart and everyone loses it, as you can imagine. Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're grateful for the opportunity to play for you. At the beginning of the year, I didn't actually schedule this concert because I wasn't sure where we'd be come end of October, beginning of November, but these kids are doing a great job. And so thank you to you parents who continue to subsidize and encourage your kids and tolerate their practicing as they're, I'm sure, practicing long hours at home. And thank you to our coaches who've been working with each of our different sections. We couldn't do what we do without our volunteer help, especially when it comes to the woodwinds, because I am useless with woodwinds. So we have help in our church for those other sections, and we're very grateful for those who are helping out in that way. So thank you so much for coming. We'll plan to see many of you, I hope, in December. Our next concert on this calendar is going to be December 12th, and we'll look forward to having some string players along for the ride with us for that concert as well. And it will all be Christmas music at that point. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. You are dismissed.